that to be true or not. So a little bit about what we want to talk about. So just a little bit about me. My job title is Executive Director for JISC Technologies, so I'm responsible for the bit of JISC that has the technology services in it, so Janet, video conferencing, all those services that you've known for a very long time. So I'm responsible for that. Some of you may have known my predecessor, which is Tim Marshall. I'm different from Tim Marshall. I don't have a tractor, and I've never worked for Disney, and I'm not going to talk about those things. So just to be clear. So I want to set the scene, first of all, about this incident, take you back to last year, October, I think we're in last year, and tell you a little bit about the background from my perspective to start off with. So, as you know, we have this network, Janet. It covers across the whole of the UK. It's really very high speed. It has around 900 organisations connected, around 18 million people that can use it, which includes universities and colleges, but also all the schools in the UK who backhaul over Janet to get global transit. And it's based around a design that gives us a resilient backbone to ensure that the backbone continues to work under a number of failing conditions. External connectivity in two places, a lot in London and also in Manchester, to give us, again, resilience, to make sure things keep going. And also regional networks, some examples shown on that slide, which are dual connected into the backbone, again, for resilient purposes. So that's Janet in a nutshell. And we've been running a program over the last few years, 4 or 5 years now, of insourcing the regional networks. You can see some dates there. So we've done quite a few. We've got Eastman and Clyde in Scotland to go during this year. And it's YHMAN that I wanted to focus on. On the 1st of September was the formal insourcing date of YHMAN, but operational control was transferred on the 1st of October. And it was the week following that that the incident occurred. Yep. So let's just a little bit, first of all, about leading up to that and our perspective of what we were taking on and the risks and what we'd done about it. So normally, in the other insourcing we've done broadly, it's not entirely true, but vastly mostly true. We insource regional networks as we replace infrastructure. As you're all aware, it's a lot of money in the infrastructure, and we're subjected to the public procurement directives, so the regional areas get re-procured every so often. So normally we insource and replace infrastructure, so we take on a new infrastructure set up in our normal operating mode for that infrastructure. So that's what we normally do. We normally have our own out-of-band access in place, so some ADSL or ISDN or whatever you have at the time, access into small routers that then link us into the control ports of the routing equipment, so we can look at stuff if we lose access to them. And we also, in our normal way of running regional networks, it's a layer 3 design, BGP routing protocol, happens to be the way that we normally put things together. So those are normally the things that we would see. So in this situation, as we got into October and we were taking over, so the infrastructure was not due for replacement for a year or so. It didn't seem sensible to go and replace it just for the sake of it because of the cost and the sunk cost that was there. It didn't seem right to do that. So we'd go ahead with the insourcing. Then we had quite a lot of a high workload around the network team for all sorts of other things that were going on around the network at the time, and we hadn't installed our out-of-band access. Now, there was out-of-band access that YHMAN already had in place, and so our risk assessment was, the network's been stable for years, runs really well, so let's go ahead and we would install our out-of-band stuff over the next few months or so, and we had a program to replace some of the routing kit, which would happen over the coming months to install stuff that we use. And then, as the network, as I said, is built using a layer 2 design, well, we'll go ahead. It's been running for years stably, so we'll go ahead, and that's all okay. So we're planning to change that to a layer 3 design that fits in with the rest of our architecture later on, so that all seems tickety-boo. So that got us to the stage just before anything happened.
So the situation in Sheffield was that we make a lot of use of cloud services. We outsourced all of our mail, calendar and docs to Google back in 2007 for student, 2009 for staff. We recently moved our VLE Blackboard to Amsterdam to their managed hosting service. We did that because we'd had some really bad performance problems. We'd lost performance in Blackboard, and we'd had the situation where we'd had to cancel exams because it wasn't working. So we moved it to improve availability and performance. We have a library system, Ex Libris Alma, which is in the cloud. And we've even used HipChat, which is our incident chat room. We've got a cloud-based service for that, so that if we lose our services on site, we can still access a chat room that we can talk to each other in and manage the incident. So heavily used teaching and learning, research, collaboration, big cloud-based solutions. And you get to those solutions. It's probably not a very good slide, but this is our university homepage. There's a little link at the top on that page that says log into Muse, and when you log into it, you get all these services underneath. So to get to our cloud-based services, you have to be able to get to the university website, and then you have to authenticate into those cloud-based services. And we hadn't moved our authentication into the cloud. We'd left that on site. So to get to our cloud services, you need to get to our website. You can probably see where things are heading. And the other thing is that we do have an incident plan, incident protocol. We have a university major incident protocol. We have one in our department. We have lots of ways of communicating with people. We have a service status page that we can change immediately when things happen. And our incident plan, and I know I'm speaking amongst friends here, you'll probably understand this, has had a lot of action. We've had things go wrong. It's an incident plan that we test quite a lot in real life situations. And the one I'm just showing you up here, that break in those fibres that you can see there, is the optic fibre cable, the duct going to our new student residences a couple of years ago. That was 4 o'clock on a Friday afternoon, and the residences were opening on the Saturday, and we were expecting 6,000 students in there, and a digger had just done that to them. So we're quite used to dealing with incidents. We've got a plan. We know how to communicate with people. So that was the situation for us. And Tim's just going to spoil it.
So the incident. Let's talk about what happened. So I'm going to show you just a piece of the regional network. This is the east ring of the regional network and the area that's important for this unfolding story. And you can see how that's connected together, a bit of university dark fibre and some circuits, 1 gig circuits bonded together between York and Hull and Hull and Leeds, and a 10 gig circuit from York to Leeds. So that's the situation. And then at the point the incident happened, it's another digger, I'm afraid, and it managed to cut its way through 4 of the 6 circuits between Hull and Leeds. So that was the start of this incident. And what happened as a result of that is that they started acting as loopback for reasons best known to themselves. And because of the structure of the network and the way that this is organised, we got a broadcast flood of ARP requests. All of the routers spent 100% of their time servicing ARP requests and failed to route any packets for 3 hours and 10 minutes. So that was the cause of the problem. So at the point this happened, to take you to what we were up to explain that, then I think there might be a counterpoint from Sheffield as to what they were up to. So from the service desk perspective, so we'd updated and issued trouble tickets. That's one of the things that we do. Those are, as you probably all know, email tickets that tend typically to go to the network teams. We send it to a particular address in each university or college and so on, and they can route them as they wish. We attempted to phone the site technical contacts for each customer, and we failed to do that, mostly because we were completely swamped by incoming calls. So we're fielding incoming calls and actually not getting round to making the outgoing calls to people to explain what was going on. So that wasn't very good. And of course, as our trouble tickets are only distributed by email,
we didn't get any of them.
Really?
No.
Yeah, so they're not visible to customers inside the region until after the service is restored, which somewhat obviates the benefit for people whom it affects. Everybody else who isn't affected gets to know what's going on, but not the people who are affected. In the Network Operations Centre, that's at 100 Gray's Inn Road and in London, and also our colleagues in Manchester. So they declared a major incident after 15 minutes. I should say something about major incidents for us. The last time we had something of this sort of size was about 6 years previously. Some of you may remember we had some faults with the core routers on the network infrastructure in the software in those, and they would occasionally decide to just stop and cause chaos. And it took us quite some time to get that sorted out with the supplier. And so whilst we've had other faults that cause other bits and pieces to fail, nothing of this size for probably about 5 or 6 years would be my recollection. We were unable to gain remote access to the routers, so our own out-of-band access wasn't yet done, as I've told you before. We didn't have that in. And the alternative out-of-band access was set up inside the regional network in such a way that because the regional network wasn't working, it didn't work for us either. So that didn't help us in that position. So we tried, the engineers were doing all sorts of things. They tried reloads of stuff, as you do, to no effect. Engineers were dispatched from our Manchester area to the Leeds entry points to see what they could see there. And we'd spoken with our security incident response team to say, if we just check to make sure that from your monitoring there's nothing that might be a malicious attack that's causing the problems as well. So CISA had a look at that. And then we worked with the University of Leeds staff, to whom we must give our grateful thanks, to install a cable to get some out-of-band access elsewhere. That was really very helpful. Thank you very much for that. And we got to the stage where we shut down part of the East Wing, which stopped the broadcast storm and enabled us to get back to some service. And if you think about the start of this incident, a bit of a short timeline at the start for us. So 10:15, the network vanished. Our network management systems just showed red everywhere, and the Giant service desk was on that. By 10:17, we'd spoken to the NOC engineers, and the manager of the service desk was alerted, and 5 engineers were looking at it. But at 10:20, the amount of alarms from our core routers was just swamping the systems as BGP sessions were going up and down, and the senior IP engineers also got involved. 10:25, it was escalated by the service desk manager to the head of network operations. Some of you might know John Seymour. So John Seymour was told at this point. Major incident declared, and 2 optical engineers were also assigned to look to make sure there's nothing optical going on. At 10:45, we asked CISA to check, just to confirm that this wasn't a distributed denial of service attack or some other form of attack. And indeed, they confirmed that they could see nothing that would indicate that.
Thank you.
I'm going to give a little more distance at this point.
You missed a bit.
Oh, yes, sorry. There were a few people involved. At the point that was to say we had a lot of people involved at that point, and people were rushing around doing all sorts of things.
So, what was it like in Sheffield to suddenly lose your internet connection? And it was a very sudden and unexplained loss. It degraded for a bit, but it did then go. And we were initially confused, I think it's fair to say, mainly because our network guys had been doing some work on the routers first thing in the morning. And my first reaction was, huh. They said it was low risk. What's happened? They were very quick to say, hey, it wasn't us. And it looks like it's all of YH Man down. You can't blame us for that. And we were by then being swamped with contact. Our help desk phones were ringing like mad. We were getting tweets, social media, everything about what's happened. Our network guys did contact Janet. They did get through to the service desk, just to be told a very simple message that, yes, it's broken, we're trying to fix it. So that was what happened. So we very quickly, again, put our incident plan in place. We had an incident meeting within 20 minutes. And our first reaction was, oh, we normally send an email out under these circumstances, but we can't do that, so we better communicate with people. So we did all the things that we would do normally, as well as email. We changed our status page. We changed the message on our incoming help desk phone, so it says, if you're ringing about a lack of internet access, please put the phone down now, we know about it. We had messages on our plasma screens all over campus. We used social media. We phoned, and this is quite important, we personally phoned senior people in the university. So I phoned the Vice-Chancellor's PA, and I phoned the Registrar's PA. You know, it was that important that it was important that I did it. And we were using as much as we could to do all of this. We had no network access. We were using any 3 or 4G we could find. And we did scrabble around and found a few MiFi devices that we managed to plug in to access things. So basically what had happened, we'd lost contact with all of the outside services, including everything that we'd moved out into the cloud because it would be more resilient there. Nobody could get to our website from outside, which meant that because you needed to get to our website to authenticate to our cloud-based services, people working off-site couldn't get to them either. So we couldn't even send people home to work because they still couldn't get to anything. We were in the middle of an exam. Students were taking an online exam using Blackboard, which we'd moved out to a managed hosted service in Amsterdam so that we didn't have to cancel exams anymore. And we kept these students under exam conditions for an hour and a half, just in case the network came back, and when it didn't, we had to send them home. I'm glad I wasn't the person in the room with those students at the time doing that. We lost, obviously, our residences. All our students' networks are connected to Janet, and we give them, like many of you do, free IPTV, so the students couldn't watch daytime television. That was a real loss. Our security cameras were running over the network, and we only discovered this during this incident, that there was no backup line for them, so they weren't being monitored. So our head of security had to bring in somebody from the company that runs our security cameras to sit in our control room, in our security control room, and monitor the security cameras from his own laptop. We have a guest wireless network. That was so under pressure, because everybody in my department suddenly logged onto it, that we don't advertise it. So we don't actually advertise over campus that we had a guest wireless network, because we were trying to use it. The 3-4G coverage disappeared very quickly. In fact, most of the cellular coverage in the area where we were, in fact, most of the university disappeared, because we were just making such big use of it. And we also lost 1 or 2 internal services. I can't give you more detail on that because I can't remember what they were. I have asked people, but I have this recollection of, in the confusion that was the 3 hours of, oh my God, we've got no network access, things that we expected to be working weren't. Now, our perception, which, as you know, Tim, is reality, was that we were getting no communication from Janet. And we were doing what everybody does in these situations, which is monitoring social media. And reasonably quickly, this picture started to be circulated on social media, which, from KC Business, showed what I think is a pretty good job of a JCB going through those 4 fibres that you talked about. So we had a fair idea, then, of what was happening. We also saw this tweet, then, from Janet. Now, I'm going to just point you in the direction of this time, that people over here can see it. It's 12:21. That's the first social media message that came out over 2 hours after the incident had started. And the interesting thing is, from our perspective, and Tim didn't know this, so I told him earlier today, that phrase, Janet engineers and the Janet security team are investigating the cause of connectivity issues, started every conspiracy theory under the sun that Janet had been hacked. Now, Tim's already told you that Janet CERT had excluded that at 10:40 something. And so this was a tweet that, for all the best reasons, whoever sent this out thought they were saying, oh, Janet engineers and security are looking at this, started all sorts of theories about Janet had obviously been hacked, and that's why they weren't talking to us. So, it's just an example of how somebody can put something out for the best reasons, and it can have unexpected consequences, I think is fair to say. Now, at this point, I got cross. Now, Tim talked about me being a tame IT director, and normally I am. However, I did get quite cross that, despite the fact at 10:30 I'd phoned the Vice-Chancellor personally to tell him there was a problem, nobody from Janet had phoned me. Might be an unreasonable thing, but that's what I got across about. So I happened to have somebody's mobile phone number in my phone. And at the time, it was at the time that Tim Marshall and Tim Kidd, who luckily have the same name, were changing jobs. And I didn't know that Tim Marshall wasn't still head of Janet, so I phoned him. And apparently I ranted at him. He wasn't there, it was his voicemail. And he phoned me back about 30 seconds later and said, Chris, I've only listened to the first 30 seconds of your voicemail and thought I'd better ring you, but you do need to know I'm on a beach, I'm on holiday, and I'm not in charge of Janet anymore. apart from that, so you need to phone this person. And
So she did.
I did. And I phoned Tim, and I don't think I ranted at you, but I wasn't very happy.
You were passionate but under control. As it happens, it was lunchtime-ish, wasn't it? And I was with a supplier apparently having lunch, which didn't last very long.
So I'll explain a bit about the sort of why that happened in a bit. But that's what happened. I have to say, after I'd phoned Tim, the communications improved, and in fact the service desk manager at Janet phoned me personally, I think every 30 minutes with an update. So I don't know what you said to him, but it worked.
I said I was scared, so perhaps you could help me. Yeah. So what have we learned? I mean, there's some very serious things out of all this, and I mean, I accept that we didn't do what we should have done, and whilst I think, looking back, I can say, because this sort of size of incident doesn't happen very often, it's very, very rare, that's not a good excuse for not being good at it when it does happen. But that was I think, the position that we found ourselves in. So I want to say a few things about what we're doing about it and what we're trying to do, and also just a little bit around the work or in the middle of in YHMAN. So one of the things that is very clear to us is that you should never ever underestimate in the network game the need for some independent out-of-band access, and we should always ensure that it's a really important thing that we do, and it's well worth the money. Even if it's only used in anger once every 5 or 6 years, it's still worth it at the point that you have it. Our view is that had we have had that in place, then we could have fixed this probably in around or sometime under 60 minutes or so. Clearly we won't ever actually know that, but that's our sort of best guess at the moment, which whilst that still would have been horrendous for everybody who was caught with the problem, it would have been better than 3 hours and 10 minutes. We also learned very clearly we've got to have better communications in these unusual fault conditions, and especially not relying on the emails that, by definition, you can't then get. So we needed to do something about that, and I'll talk a little bit about what we're doing in a second. And we also, it was very clear, we have to overhaul and improve our major incident procedure, which I think, if I reflect on where we're at, it was more of a custom and practice activity than a really clearly defined and updated procedure, which is where we've got to now. And also, anything we can learn from this, we will have put into our final 2 insourcing projects, because I think that's important as well. So we've done a lot of work on the major incident procedure. There's more to come, and this is an open invitation for you to join in with that as well. I'll talk a little about that in a second. So first off, to ensure that our major incidents are managed by a senior member of staff, but in a coordination role and not dug into the detail of it. One of the things that I think has been very clear as I've spoken with Chris as we were talking about this presentation is that if you're not careful, if you're dragged into the minutiae detail of trying to fix something, lots of stuff is happening, as you'll all know. Lots of stuff is going on. It's all very, very busy and important and so on. And you really just don't know what it's like for the people who aren't involved in it, because what they see is, well, the square root of nothing. And that's the problem, I think. So we've put up just recently JISC a Twitter feed for major incidents. So please do follow that. And I'll show you a little bit of use of that in a moment. We've set up a web feed as well for major incidents. So ja.net/mi gets a page, which again I'll show you in a moment. One of the things that we picked up very clearly is that the communications team needs to be integrated into what we're doing, but separate from us. And one of the powers that I have seen from us being part of a wider JISC is that we have a separate comms team who are not steeped in networks, but in comms. So they now have this watching brief that means they take the view of what do we need to tell people. Because we're from outside of this, we don't know all the things you're doing. And actually now we're worried because we don't know, it's been too long, we need to know, we need to know. So that sort of outside coming in, not nagging, but nagging at the same time, that push to it, I think is really important. So that changes the way in which we start looking at our communications to people, which I think is important. We are really keen to get suggestions from anybody else that sees stuff, and I genuinely mean that. We've got together a process which will be reviewed regularly, and we'll run some simulations of the process. One of our maybe happy problems, but a problem all the same, is that it isn't that often that we have a large amount of people cut off. And so therefore, we do need to make sure that we keep this up by something more than just using it in normal practice as well. We will run some simulations, and I'm told that we will make sure it can't be confused with a real incident, because that could be another bad side effect. And I think one of the points which Chris had said that I hadn't realised before, which is that one tweet that came out 2 hours afterwards, absolutely well-meaning, but by saying what it said, caused more angst and conspiracy theories than anything else, is a salutary lesson. By asking our comms team to look after this and to look after it independently from us and to be clear what that means to someone who's not steeped in the middle of it, I think will be an important separate perspective that will help us to do much better. So we had an incident on the Chelmsford POP, if anybody's interested, the other night. Excellent. So we had this incident at the Chelmsford POP, and so we tweeted through the major incident stuff there, and we updated the web page. It's just a cut of that to see the sort of thing we're now trying to do to make things better for people, so that they've got information about things. So I just want to say a little bit about what that means we're doing with YHMAN in this Eastern Ring. It's happening across the rest of YHMAN, which can show you the Eastern Ring bit of it to explain the sort of work we're doing. We brought all this forward as a result of the incident, so we did make some real changes to our work plans to address the root cause of it, as well as changing our way that we react to major incidents. So we put in some new routers, and the first change was to take some of the connectivity that was being used between York and Hull and Leeds and move that across onto the new stuff, so that's sort of running. And then gradually to move people over onto that, and to move the circuits from the blue blobs down to the green blobs as we move people across to get more capacity into the new stuff. So there's another change there as we move some more phase 2, and we're sort of in phase 2.5 at the moment. And we're moving people across as individual universities, colleges and so on are happy to move, so that requires some coordination and agreement with you, rather than us just saying it's this date. So there's been some of that going on, and the idea is to get to the stage where eventually we're using our new network configuration, and the blue blobs can go. So that's actually quite a lot of work across the whole of the region, but it's important to do it to address the root cause, as well as ensuring that we're ready for when things happen.
Thank you. So these are the things that we learned. We did learn that our network is vulnerable, and we hadn't thought it was before, and that's because normally our Janet network has been so good and so reliable that we didn't even think that one day we might lose it for a while. And actually, that's a mistake on our part. We should have, that should have been built into our plans. Agree with Tim, keep your incident plan under review and know what you'll do. We do review our incident plan, but actually knowing how you will cope if you can't send emails to people, if you have lost your network, is really important. And know what you lose. I mean, we lost the ability to get to our incident chat room that we put in place so we could chat when we had an incident. So actually think about what you might lose. Plan for alternate access. Make sure we're not scrabbling around the department looking for MiFi devices, and actually have some around. I think this is something we are considering, and I know some other people in the area are, is think about where you're authenticating into your services, and if you've moved things into the cloud, do you need to move your authentication in the cloud as well? Or do you need an alternate way of getting to them when your network's gone? That might not have been part of your plan, but it should be. And particularly, understand how your other services are set up that you're not running. We didn't realise until probably an hour into the incident, the issue we had with our security cameras. And again, a learning point from us was we hadn't involved our control centre, our security centre, as early as we should have done. It was them that notified us that there was a problem with security cameras. And so really understanding how that works and having a backup is really important. Communicating that you're a single point of contact, because the way the Janet Service Status page worked, and we sort of understand why they did this, once the network had come back up, their page still said, the network's back, but you should consider it at risk. Now, most of us know what that means. It means, we fixed it, but there's still a big hole in the road somewhere, and we've done this, we've done that, but it's up, but it should still be considered at risk. The guy who was head of our security couldn't quite get his head around this at risk, and which is fine. I mean, that's not his role. And so he wouldn't stand down the person monitoring the security cameras. And in fact, he kept him, I'm looking at Dave because Dave knows the exact number, I think he kept him in our control room for 24 hours, okay, monitoring these, even, so that everything came up at about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and that guy still stayed there overnight because our head of security was not going to operate these security cameras on a network that was at risk. And the reason for that single point of contact is he then started phoning Janet. And, you know, we have to actually say to him, you know what, you know when we have an incident involving the police and you tell us we must not phone the police, you're the single point of contact. When it's an IT incident, we're the same. So I think getting that message out to stop other people phoning your service provider and understand this closure of an incident and how you close it and how you communicate to people that it's closed and what at risk means. But the biggest thing we learned, obviously, is communication is the key. And I think for me, what was really important about this incident is it put me into a different position. I became, we were trying to think of what to call it.
The victim.
Tim said victim. I was thinking of an incidentee rather than incident, you know, but I was the recipient of an incident of a loss of service that I couldn't really do anything about. And so I realised how our users feel when we have an incident and they don't know what's going on. So to me, that really brought it home how important it was to communicate and how personal communication has to be, etc. So it was quite a learning experience for us, I think, being in that situation. And the other, of course, the most obvious learning point for me was this last one, which Tim is quite worried about, and I think he's probably going to change his mobile number very soon. So I think we've almost kept time. And I would personally like to thank Tim, because I did badger him to come and do this. I didn't charm him at all. I just told him to come and do it. And you know, we all have things go wrong. We all do. And you know, it's great that in this sort of community we can stand up and share what went wrong and learn from it. We're not into a blame thing here. We're into what can we learn and how can we work better in the future. So I think that's us done.
Okay, we do have time for a couple of questions. A couple of things that I noted. Diggers are not good for networks, so try and avoid those. Nor are rats, apparently. We had a rat incident the other day. And tame directors can get cross, so it's not always a good thing. So, have we got any questions for Tim or Chris?
You're not going to let us get away with it that lightly, surely.
There we go.
Oh, I'll go first.
Simon Marsden from Edinburgh. I was very interested in your at-risk problem, because that's a problem I've seen. We declare things done but at risk, or we're going to make this change and then there's another 2 hours at risk. And I found it very difficult because people don't understand what you mean. So I would have a plea there to make your messages really be concerned about what behaviours you want the people to be engaged with. So it's at risk. Do you actually want them to not use it, to use it differently, or do you just want to say to them, it's done, and if it goes wrong again, you go into a different process? I think there's a real lesson for all of us in that, and I reflect on that.
Yeah, I think it's a very good point. If I'm brutal about it, I think probably everybody uses the phrase at risk because it in some sense offloads the risk from the person saying it to the people receiving the message, because then when it does go down we can say, well, we told you it was at risk. But actually that's a very seriously a really interesting point. I mean, the question for me, I think, and I don't know the answer yet, but the question I think is about saying, to what extent do we believe in our professional opinion of what's happened, that there really is a tangible risk here that this is just going to go down in the next 10 minutes. It's someone's holding the bits together with the fingers in the dike and nothing more than that, and therefore don't think we've done our work. As again saying, actually we fixed that. And yes, sure, something else might go wrong, but rather than just saying, we're going to give you 2 hours, we're saying it's at risk, we should be saying something different. So I will take that message on board, and we've got some of my colleagues in the audience who will, Francis, make a note for me to remind me, so that's, thank you. I don't know the answer yet, but it's worth thinking, isn't it?
Mike Freeman from City University. I just wondered at what point you actually told people about the digging accident, because it seems that the stuff that's gone out is a bit ethereal. It's there's a problem, someone's looking at it, but did you actually say this is why it was caused?
Well, what I haven't shown you is all of the emails that went out that Chris didn't get until afterwards, of course. Absolutely, what we do is, in tickets, is we say at that point exactly what we've heard from suppliers, which sometimes mean we say, they've told us it's a digger incident and it's at this point, and then a little while later they say, well, actually it's not. Because as we all know, in a lot of these things, there is always some confusion around some of this stuff, and the information coming back from the field isn't always as accurate as it should be. We had one the other day which told us that the fault was a fibre break inside a pop, which I thought, well, that surely means someone could stand there and put it back together again, 'cause it's inside the point of presence. How can it be a fibre break inside the point of presence? Turned out to be 1.5 kilometres away from the point of presence, and the message came through from the supplier, and so you get those sorts of confusions. So that information did go out. However, that was of no help because of the way we sent it out. My sense is that we will do that better with the social media and so on for the future, and that's definitely our plan. Okay.
So, Heidi Fraser-Krauss from York, one of the institutions affected. So, two things. From our point of view, what I noticed was that everybody spoke to each other at work more when the network was down. We all sat in the coffee room and chatted, so that was an interesting point. And apparently that also happened in other places in the university. But the second thing, and a more serious point, was that it made the business think very hard. Actually, about how important the network was to them, because they couldn't do anything very much apart from speak to each other. So in some ways, if that was a silver lining to the cloud, I could pass that one on. Thanks, Tim, for taking us offline for 3 hours and 10 minutes.
Great. Yeah.
Is anybody over here?
Oh, we can do it here.
Jerry Nyman, a bit of a techie question. Presumably the network was set up in such a way that digging through those fibres shouldn't have brought it down.
Absolutely, absolutely.
So how confident are you that a similar incident won't bring down the replacement network?
We're very confident. Oh, gosh. Oh, you really?
Is it being filmed?
Is it? Oh, no.
Yeah.
As long as my network techies don't see it, we're safe. On a serious note, the reason for that was because of the difference between running a layer 2 network and a layer 3 network. Absolutely confident that this is why we've spent a lot of time pushing forward, getting the next new equipment in, and we're running it differently. So I'm confident.
Okay. One last question, because we'd like to move on.
Get the tag.
Luke Taylor, University of Bristol. It wasn't a question, it was just echoing what Tim said earlier about separating roles within an emergency response. At Bristol, we got some help designing a disaster recovery plan, and that very much is about making sure up front you know who's doing what. And so even earlier last year, I work in the applications area, but I led an emergency management team for a major SAN incident, having no knowledge at all about SAN, but being able to understand and lead who's doing what across a major incident. And I think that's really key that you do that in those high-stress situations.
And I think what's key there is, if you like, protecting your technical people who are actually just trying to fix it, and they don't need people going up to them all the time going, what are you doing? Because, I mean, they have to protect them from me in that respect. So, yeah, having somebody who's actually the link person is really important, who shouldn't be part of the technical team.
That's a good point.
Okay, once again, thank you for Chris and Ted.
Thank you.